Settlers' early interactions with Native Americans tended to be very rocky. There were many instances in which Indians would kidnap young white women and either hold them for a ransom or raise them as part of their tribe. One success story was that of Mary Jemison, who was completely assimilated into Indian society. She was captured by Shawnee Indians and French soldiers in Pennsylvania. On April 5, 1758, she was later sold to Senecas, who renamed her Deguanas. She married and went with her husband and their young son to the Senecas territory in western New York. Although her husband died on the journey, Deguanas remarried there and had 6 more children with her new husband. During the American Revolutionary War, the American army destroyed the Seneca village, and Deguanas and her children fled, and were later joined by her husband. They lived in relative peace in the Gardner Flats, where she was a large landowner. She was naturalized as an American citizen in 1817. She was known as the Old White Woman of the Genesee. The story of Olivia Oatman is much more tragic. Although cautioned to remain in camp until other wagons could provide a measure of safety, the Oatman family set out for Fort Yuma on the morning of March 11, 1851. Besides Olive, who was 13, and Mary Ann, who was 7, there were 4 other children, among them 14-year-old Lorenzo. After a few days of travel, their camp was visited by 19 Apaches, all demanding food. With barely enough provisions to sustain his own family, Royce Oatman could spare very little for the Indians. It wasn't enough. The Apaches attacked. Everyone in the family was butchered, except Olive and Mary Ann. The 2 sisters became slaves. Apache children would make them work, compelling them to pack fuel and water upon their backs over long distances. If the girls didn't do as they were told, the Indian parents would beat them. Their luck changed when the Mojaves bartered for the 2 sisters. The girls began to thrive with the Mojave. They were given blankets for covering and for warmth. Food was provided with them, and they were not obliged to labor. Lands were allotted to them, and they were given seeds to grow corn, melons, and beans. Both girls were tattooed on their chins and armed by sticking cactus thorns into them and then rubbing dye or charcoal into the wounds. After about a year, a terrible famine struck. The Mojave tribe and the several Indian children died. Mary Ann grew so weak that she could no longer get up to search for food. When Mary died, the Mojave allowed Olive to bury Mary Ann instead of cremating the body, as was their usual custom. Unknown to her, older brother Lorenzo had survived the massacre, and he was searching everywhere for her. It was 5 years into her captivity, but the break finally came when a Yuma Indian named Francisco said he would go search among the Mojave Nation for her. Olive and Francisco left on foot for Fort Yuma. They traveled with great speed, having to swim the Colorado River in 2 places, and then 2 days later she was reunited with her brother, Lorenzo. Olive and Lorenzo remained close all of the rest of their lives. She married a wealthy man named John Brant Fairchild. The Fairchilds lived in Detroit, Michigan for a few years and then moved to Sherman, Texas, where they adopted a daughter, naming her Elizabeth, Mary Elizabeth, after Olive's mother and sister. Olive Ann Oatman Fairchild died of a heart attack at the age of 65. After an Episcopal funeral service in her home, she was laid to rest in the West Hill Cemetery in Sherman, Texas. Cynthia Ann Parker's story is heart-wrenching for another reason. On May 19, 1836, Fort Parker was attacked by several hundred Caddo, Comanche, and Kiowa. During the raid, the Comanches kidnapped Cynthia Ann. She remained with the Indians for almost 25 years, forgetting her white ways, and became thoroughly Comanche. She was trained in native ways and was totally devoted to her adopted parents. The memories of her white life quickly faded, and every attempt to ransom her was refused by the tribal council at her request. In the mid-1840s, her brother John Parker asked her to return to their white family, but she refused, explaining that she loved her husband Pita and children, Kwane, Pecos, and Tapasana, too much to leave them. On December 18, 1860, Texas Rangers under Lawrence Sylvanian Ross attacked their hunting camp at Mule Creek. Pito was wounded but managed to escape with their 2 sons, Quanah and Pecos. The Rangers were surprised to find that one of the Comanche had blue eyes, a non-English speaking white woman with her infant daughter. Cynthia was then recaptured by the Rangers. While traveling through Fort Worth, she was photographed with her daughter at breast and her hair cut short, a Comanche sign of mourning. She thought that Pita and her sons were dead. On April 8, 1861, a Texas legislator voted her grant of $100 annually for 5 years and a league of land, but she was never able to adapt to living in white society again, and even made several unsuccessful attempts to flee to her Comanche family. In 1863, her daughter Tapasana died of influenza. Tapasana's death was the final blow for Cynthia Ann. She refused to speak or eat and eventually died in 1870 of influenza at the age of 43.